now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be ever more acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. You have heard that it was said to those in ancient times. This refrain echoes through today's passage from Matthew's masterful Sermon on the Mount. Jesus gives 4 specific examples of what it means to be faithful followers of God in contemporary times. Jesus had just declared his purpose in the passage immediately before this, saying, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill." Jesus is not preaching in a vacuum. Jesus' listeners, then as now, live with a received tradition of practices and beliefs. And so Jesus describes how it's always been, repeating, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times," and then follows up with what a faithful evolution looks like, proclaiming, "But I say to you." Jesus does not abolish what came before. Jesus fulfills God's will, God's dream in new ways. Jesus transforms the tradition. And Jesus was not the first to do this sacred work. The time of the Roman occupation of Judah was not the first time God's people had to contend with the past, present, and future of faith. Roughly 500 years earlier, in the Restoration period following the Babylonian exile, God's people likewise had to reshape their faith while they remade their world. Nobody at that time said the words exactly, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times." But many did the work of faithfully transforming their tradition. Those who rebuilt Jerusalem at Persia's bidding and under Persian control had held on to their beliefs and practices from prior to the devastation of the Babylonian exile and destruction. What would they do with the tradition that they knew when the time of the restoration came and everything had changed? How could the contemporary people of God live faithfully? The people of the restoration figured it out. So did Jesus' earliest disciples and the first generations of Christians. They were not and they are not the last of God's faithful to transform their tradition for contemporary times. You have heard that it was said to those of modern times that ancient texts are so corrupted by myth that they are of little value to contemporary people. We deconstructed our ancient texts in ways such that there was little or nothing left for our heads to contend with. And yet, in our desire to be faithful, we left our rationality behind and retreated instead into our hearts. We can never be certain about much about our ancient forebears. But I say to you that there is history, culture, belief, and practice that we can know throughout the biblical texts. The stories of our ancestors told about their experience of God continue to contain wisdom from which we too can learn and grow. Devotional, heartfelt readings of the Bible matter. And so does thoughtful biblical study that engages our head for deeper understanding of our faithful forebears. We are living in an intense time of transformation in our world and in our church. At Parish Council a couple of weeks ago, we reviewed some key numbers that express something of our story, the story of this parish. Changes in church attendance and membership are reflected in both decline and increase in different ways. The pre-pandemic parish, in terms of its specific people and ministries, has declined by something in the neighborhood of 40%. Now that decline, however, is offset by as much as 25% of an influx of visitors and new parishioners in the past year. It has been said by those in modern times that churches and church people don't like change. But I say to you that, like it or not, we are in the midst of it. The question is not whether we will change or not. The question is, how will we respond to the changes coming to us, the changes all around us and within us? Changes in parish finances, both on the income and expense sides, also tell a story that is, at its best, a story of transformation. We have significantly reduced, which is to say we have eliminated, our children and youth staff expenses. This reality is a source of grief for many. We remember times of expansive youth and children's programming that was a source of hope, pride, and joy. It was said in modern times that the best, or perhaps the only way to form young people in faith was to teach them our beliefs, apart from the worshiping community. But I say to you that people of all ages are more than floating heads. We experience, we live out core values like compassionate and inclusive love in community, worshiping and serving together. Perhaps the loss of our pride about having separate programming for different age groups. With that, we can find a new ground for hope and joy in the development of truly multi-generational community, growing and making a difference together. On the income side of our finances, in the past few years, we have added significant rental income. And the fundraising budget line has significantly reduced. Prior to the pandemic, the two big events of the Christmas Fair and the Spring Fling accounted for the majority of our fundraising. But even then, the energy for those events was declining. When lamenting the loss of these events, many people describe a sense of common purpose and a community connectedness as what they miss the most. I don't know why it was said in modern times that community events and fundraising need to be yoked together, but I say to you, there is no reason why we cannot transform this tradition of ours. We enjoyed one another's company, for instance, along with some wine and cheese on New Year's Day. We can just admit that our desire, our need for connection in community is as strong as it has ever been. We can just donate the funds needed for community building events all at once, instead of regularly digging into our pockets for loonies and toonies, for coffee or pancakes or wine and cheese. We can transform our tradition, our beliefs, our practices for contemporary times, our contemporary reality. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, but I say to you, Jesus repeats today as he encourages his listeners to rethink the practices and the beliefs that they have received. As God's own self, Jesus embodies the past, present, and future of faith, both as an utterly unique and completely consistent combination of humanity and divinity. Faithfulness, our faithfulness, is about responding to change, the change that we cannot stop, no matter how hard we try. We respond by transforming our tradition for our current reality.